The problem with Daisy Jones and the Six. Adaptations have long been the bread and butter of Hollywood, with everything from comic books to video games to short stories being reimagined for film and TV. One of the latest books to get the Hollywood treatment is Daisy Jones and the Six for Amazon Prime, which was written by Taylor Jenkins Reid, whose other novel, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, is currently in development at Netflix. Following the titular Daisy Jones and members of the rock band The Six, the story details their rise to fame, personal hardships, and eventual split at the height of their success. As is to be expected, certain changes were made when adapting the book to TV, and in today's video we'll be talking about which of these changes worked and which didn't, as well as an overall review of the show, including the acting, music, and costuming. Obviously, there will be spoilers. Let's get into it. For those of you watching this review with absolutely no knowledge of Daisy Jones and the Six, here's a simple synopsis and introduction to the characters. Born into a life of equal privilege and neglect, Daisy Jones finds herself drawn to the LA music scene in the 70s, and along with drugs, it's the only thing that brings her happiness. Pretty boy Billy Dunn lives in Philadelphia with his younger brother, Graham, who starts a band with a group of friends, which Billy becomes the lead singer and frontman of. The band initially includes Billy, Graham, Pete, Warren, and Chuck, although Chuck is eventually drafted into the Vietnam War and dies a few months later, where he's later replaced by Eddie, and shortly after, Karen joins the band, which they rename The Six. While in Philadelphia, Billy meets and falls in love with Camilla, and although their relationship starts off great, after the band goes on tour, she decides to break up with him, refusing to put her life on hold for his career and follow him around. In retaliation, he begins drinking, using drugs, and sleeping with other girls, but eventually is able to make amends with Camilla and they all move to LA together. Soon after, Camilla gets pregnant and she and Billy decide to get married, but this sets him down a dark path, and when the band goes on tour once again, he picks up his past habits. Camilla walks in on him cheating with a groupie, but refuses to leave him and Billy continues to spiral. It's only after he misses his daughter's birth that he accepts that he needs to go to rehab. Meanwhile, Daisy has befriended Simone Jackson, a singer, who becomes her closest confidant and is often the only person who can talk Daisy off the ledge she frequently finds herself on. Daisy has built a reputation around town for her unique voice and is eventually asked to sing on one of the Six's records, where she immediately butts heads with Billy. The song becomes a hit, and in the wake of the success, they decide to collaborate once again on an entire album, but it's stalled by Daisy and Billy's frequent bickering. As the two attempt to work through the issue, it becomes clear that there's something between them, and Billy, who is constantly striving to be a better man for his family, chooses to hate Daisy instead of giving into their chemistry, and this love-hate relationship inspires the direction of the entire album. After being rejected by Billy, Daisy leaves the country, where she quickly meets and marries another man, who she brings back to the States just in time to tour with the Six. He grows increasingly possessive, but after Daisy has an overdose that he does little to prevent, she decides to leave him. During this time, Graham and Karen have secretly been sleeping together, but after she becomes pregnant, which would effectively put an end to her music career, she decides to have an abortion, which Graham takes poorly and the two stop speaking. Daisy and Billy's relationship has become even more tumultuous, affecting both of them mentally and emotionally, and Camilla eventually asks that she leave the band for the greater good, which Daisy does, and the entire group disbands in 1977. Years later, Camilla has passed away, but in a letter she tells Billy to reunite with Daisy for one more song. One of the most obvious differences between the book and the TV show is the time period, with the interviews taking place in 1997 instead of the 2010s. Although this makes the characters younger, it doesn't really wind up affecting the plot, so I don't mind the change, especially since it meant that they didn't have to attempt extreme prosthetics or find different actors to play the characters in their 70s. The project also changes from a book to a documentary, which not only feels more timely, but makes more sense for its interview format. I saw a lot of criticism directed at the show's decision to exclude Pete from the band, with Camilla serving as the honorary sixth member for which the group gets its name.
6 of us will never agree on a name.
What about the Six?
I don't actually have an issue with this, because in the book, the character literally speaks only once at the very end of the novel, and is only referenced to by the other characters. The change that I didn't care for was what they did to Chuck. Making him leave the band for a more stable job as a dentist, as opposed to dying in the war, erases a lot of the other characters' motivations. Because Eddie is initially Chuck's replacement, Billy is immediately dismissive of him, which helps set the stage for their growing resentment of one another. although admittedly, the show does a good job of setting that up regardless. Chuck's death inspires the band to not only work harder in his memory, but to stay together despite the hardships, which is a question you're often left wondering while watching the show. The Vietnam War was incredibly formative for anyone in the 70s, having an effect on multiple aspects of American culture and society, so ignoring its existence altogether fails to paint a clear picture of the era. In the book, Pete serves as a foil to Billy, staying loyal to his girlfriend and not letting the fame get to him. And I feel like in the series they could have still introduced the character in Philadelphia, but had him decide not to join the band in California in order to stay with his girlfriend and have him be the one who goes to dental school. Not only would this have been a way of paying homage to the original character, but it also would have allowed them to keep Chuck's original storyline while still keeping their new headcount at 5. Eddie is greatly improved upon in the series. We see him get routinely sidelined by Billy, first as the band's lead singer, then guitarist, and he even loses out to him when it comes to love, with Eddie having feelings for Camilla long before she and Billy get together. This addition makes his resentment towards Billy take on a more personal edge, while also making his inability to leave the group more understandable, as it's his only way to be near her. I don't exactly ship the two of them together, but I do think it sets up an interesting dynamic where we wonder what Camilla's life would have been like if she'd been with him instead.
You'd choose me over a short thing like that?
Choose you over everyone.
Eddie isn't necessarily likable. In fact, I almost find him to be more pathetic in the show, but because Billy always seems out to get him, his anger feels more justified. In the book, Warren is a misogynistic asshole, frequently complaining about Camilla, Daisy, and Karen with sexist language. But thanks to actor Sebastian Chacon, he's a far more likable character in the series, coming across as a goofy hippie who occasionally puts his foot in his mouth but doesn't mean any harm by it. His character serves more as comic relief than anything else, which I actually think is necessary for a story that would otherwise be incredibly dark and depressing.
No one asked me to sign their tits anymore, but that's okay. Actually, that's not true. Lisa sometimes, she'll, just to be nice.
Simone's character is similarly expanded upon in the series, with the character's music career being given more attention, as well as her romantic relationships. Besides seeing her struggle in the music industry, we don't learn much about Simone in the book, and more often than not, she's babysitting Daisy. But in the series, we get to see the evolution of the character's career, from a backup singer in LA to a disco darling in New York, and we see her exploration and acceptance of her queer identity, which is heartwarming to watch. I also like that we actually see her and Daisy argue, with Simone actually putting her foot down when Daisy's gone too far, which isn't really the case in the book. I also love how supportive and healthy her relationship with Bernie is, and I hope to see both Nabia Bey and Aisha Harris in more things because they were great. I find Graham to be more sensitive and sweet in the series than the novel, where he feels more soft-spoken and somber comparatively. His crush on Karen is made much more obvious, but they also spend a lot of time together just hanging out as friends. And the fact that he even gets rejected by her, twice, is a brutally embarrassing event that makes him more endearing. He very easily could have come across as a typical friend-zoned guy with ulterior motives, but their interactions with one another feel much more genuine, and I found myself actively rooting for them, which makes their breakup all the more upsetting to watch. In the novel, Karen has more of a chip on her shoulder, often commenting on sexism within the industry. And this sort of modern woman angle is played up within the series, with Karen being open about her sexuality and also telling Graham that she wants to keep their relationship a secret to not jeopardize her role in the band. An interesting change from the novel is that Karen reveals to the other band members that she and Graham have been sleeping together, and by defending him, it makes their relationship feel less one-sided. I will say that I found Suki Waterhouse's performance to be the weakest out of the bunch, as it was not only incredibly reminiscent of the cool girl characters she's played in other movies, but I felt as though she wasn't able to pull off some of the more emotional moments. I personally think that the book does a better job of setting up Camilla and Billy's relationship, with everyone noting that Billy treats her differently than any of his past girlfriends and is wholeheartedly devoted to her, and the amount of effort they put into the relationship early on feels equal. Plus, with Camilla actually breaking up with him when he first goes on tour, it helps make her insistence to stay together later on more poignant.
You don't just stop loving someone because things get hard.
The series skips over the early events of their relationship fairly quickly, with their breakup lasting less than a day. And with the two spending more time apart than they do together, and the bad times far outweighing the good, we're left wondering why she's so desperate to save this relationship that never seemed that great to begin with. In the TV adaptation, Camilla expresses more concern and occasionally anger over the state of her relationship with Billy, whereas in the novel, she's unshakingly confident that their marriage will prevail in spite of Billy's feelings for Daisy. I personally think the series is far more realistic. After all, who's going to peacefully watch their husband flirt with another woman? But because it happens so often, we eventually get to a point where we're like, okay, I think it's time you leave him. Although their relationship is weaker, I do think that the series does a great job with Camilla's character by highlighting her charisma, independence, and perseverance. She's much more involved with the band, being friendly with every member of the group, and doesn't spend as much time waiting around for Billy as she does in the book. I also like that she becomes a sort of matchmaker for Karen and Graham, as it makes their friendship feel more realistic. Overall, I think Camilla Morrone did a fantastic job with the character, playing her as sensitive but strong at the same time, and the scene where she catches Billy cheating is one of the best in the entire show. Although I found Billy and Camilla's relationship a touch unbelievable, they absolutely nailed the dynamic between Daisy and Billy. Some people have called it enemies to lovers, but I don't think that's accurate. They're so similar that they see in the other person all of their worst attributes and fears epitomized, but they also have a unique understanding of one another that no one else has. Camilla keeps Billy grounded, which is why he fights so hard to be the person he thinks she deserves, even if it isn't who he actually is. Whereas Daisy is essentially the devil, constantly beckoning him back over to the dark side, and he has no choice but to reject her in order to protect himself from temptation. I saw some people complain that Billy was too much of an asshole in the series, but I think that's because they romanticize the version of the character presented in the novel. Billy Dunn grew up with women fawning all over him, so it makes sense for him to be cocky and selfish as an adult, especially as a famous rock star. He firmly believes that he's the only one who should have any say in the band, which is why he butts heads with both Eddie and Daisy, who are the only ones who have the nerve to stand up to him. He harbors intense guilt over what he's done to Camilla, and since addiction is a constant battle, he's absolutely miserable, which he takes out on others. My issue with the character in the series is that he lacks charm. The thing with Daisy Jones is that even though she's abrasive and difficult, she has the talent and star power to back it up, so people put up with her in spite of that. Billy, on the other hand, is never positioned as this amazing musician, which is literally why Daisy has to group up with the Six in the first place, so they should have made him more suave to make up for that. I also think that would have made his interactions with Daisy more interesting. In both the novel and the series, the way Billy acts around Daisy is supposed to be noticeably different than how he treats everyone else, hating her as a defense mechanism, which everyone notices. But in the series, he's a dick to everybody all the time. So when he first quarrels with her, it doesn't seem that different from how he interacts with Graham or Eddie. The show attempts to make up for this by having Billy occasionally be nicer to Daisy than other people, but that direction makes it too obvious that they like one another. I've seen a lot of people argue over who Billy is meant to be with, Camilla or Daisy, but I think that's missing the point. Love isn't a simple thing. Just like people, it's imperfect and complicated. Camilla made the choice to stay with Billy in spite of everything he did because she loved him, and Billy made the decision to become sober and then to leave the band for the same reason. Billy and Daisy had an undeniable bond, but they only made each other worse, and eventually that fire would have burnt them both. Although Daisy and Billy's will they, won't they tension is likely the storyline that most people will remember, the series is also an homage to sisterhood, with the female characters fiercely supporting each other through thick and thin. Compared to the book, the love and respect the characters have for each other is much more obvious, with Daisy and Simone's friendship being less like a mother and child and more sisterly. While the book mainly mentions Karen and Camilla's friendship, in the series we see Daisy interact more with both women, with Karen bailing her out of jail and Camilla thanking her when Billy refuses to. This helps make Daisy feel more integrated into their world, instead of just being a random girl who works with Billy that he has a crush on. Playing an it girl who is supposed to be so charismatic that the entire room turns and stares is no easy task, but I think Riley Keough did a great job of it, even if I was confused by the character's country girl twang. She's especially good in Daisy's more unhinged moments, perfectly expressing the character's rage, cockiness, and vulnerability. She also has an amazing set of pipes on her. Those Presley jeans are really something. Speaking of which, I think they went above and beyond when it came to writing and producing songs for the show, releasing nearly 30 for the various musical acts. None of them are things I'd go out of my way to listen to, but they're believable enough for a fictional band that you aren't taken back during their frequent appearances in the series. Some of the lyrics are a bit repetitive, especially in Honeycomb and Regret Me, but I do think they accurately capture the tension between Daisy and Billy. The cast has joked that Amazon wants them to take the fictional band on tour, but I guess we'll just have to see. Anytime a book gets adapted, there are fans who will lambast any and all changes to the source material, but I am not one of those people. And in my opinion, most of the changes made in Daisy Jones and the Six helped build a stronger narrative and created more interesting characters. You have to remember that the novel is told exclusively in an interview format, meaning that the characters aren't necessarily the most reliable witnesses, which is directly stated in one of the first pages of the book. So it's very possible that the events and situations that are related to the audience didn't play out the way we're led to believe, meaning certain characters or events could have been depicted in a more or less positive light. This is something that many fans of the book don't seem to realize, which I think could have been easily remedied in the series by having the interviewees contradict each other, or the events in the flashback, more frequently. Take for example how the band eventually came up with their name. In the book, certain members take credit, while others attribute its meaning to other things. It would have been funny in the series to have seen that interaction play out in the interview format, with everyone recalling it a different way, before cutting to the diner scene. One thing that I think they struggled with is capturing just how popular both Daisy Jones and the Six were. Although we see them on tour with tons of fans, the magnitude of the situation is hard to grasp because they're only ever on stage, in hotels, or on the tour bus. In the book, they win major awards, are interviewed by multiple magazines, and go on talk shows, showing how much of a moment they were having. Even a montage would have helped make this a little more obvious, since we would have been shown, not told, this information. Plus, it would have helped with the passage of time, which is really hard to grasp, something the costuming doesn't help with, which is actually my biggest qualm with the series. Costume designer Janice Wingate, who also worked on 1999's She's All That and 2021's He's All That, took inspiration from various musicians and celebrities for the characters in Daisy Jones and the Six. Billy's wardrobe took notes from Bruce Springsteen, something mentioned in the novel as well, but instead of coming across as clean-cut and simple, I think he just looks boring. Billy is known for his frequent use of denim, which is definitely present in the TV series, but I feel like he resembles a country artist more than a rock star. Springsteen's signature uniform of t-shirts and jeans were constant throughout the 70s, so Billy doesn't necessarily have to change his look every few years, but I do wish they'd done something with his hair, because it looks the same the entire time, so it's impossible to figure out what year it's supposed to be. The other male members of the Six are much more interesting to look at than Billy, with the costume designer taking inspiration for their wardrobe from Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, Led Zeppelin, and Jim Morrison. Like Billy, most of the boys suffer from never getting a haircut syndrome, but at least some of them sport curls or grow mustaches to show the passage of time. Eddie dresses a bit more square than the other boys, with neckties, waistcoats, and high-rise bell-bottoms, while Graham is sort of devoid of style, and just wears things that are generally popular during the 70s, which does fit his sort of salt-of-the-earth, small-town boy vibe. I actually think Warren is the best-dressed character in the entire series, as he's the only one who winds up looking like he's lived through the 1970s as a rich rock star, with his style evolving over the course of the decade. As he becomes wealthier, we see his wardrobe become more eclectic and loud, with embroidered vests, fur coats, and colorful trousers, which helps highlight a huge aspect of male fashion in the 1970s, which was its glamour. I just wish they'd taken it a step further by giving him platform shoes. Because most of the men don't have a super distinctive look that carries them through the decade, when we see them in the 90s, it barely looks like any time has passed, and only Warren and Graham look like men who are now in their 40s. Musician Linda Ronstadt was cited as the inspiration behind Daisy's bohemian look, which you can see in the character's denim cutoffs, kimonos, and wrap tops. Although Ronstadt was at the height of her singing career in the 1970s, she and Daisy are very different people, so I'm not sure if that was the best direction to go for her character, as all of the lace, florals, and pastels read as far too sweet for someone who's known to be a firecracker. I personally think Janis Joplin would have been a better choice, not only because her hippie-ish style feels like a better fit for Daisy's free spirit, but because the two also struggled with very similar issues. Joplin passed away in 1970 from a drug overdose, so she couldn't be the point of reference for Daisy throughout the entire decade. But for the early half of the 70s, I think it could have worked, at least for the period of time before Daisy skyrocketed to fame. There's a distinctive messiness to the 1970s that I thought Daisy's outfits were missing, which not only made her look way too modern, but failed to capture how out of control she is. Also, the book frequently talks about how little clothing Daisy wears, but in the series we wind up seeing her in a lot of trousers. Honestly, one of the only outfits early on that feels like her is the men's button-up and cowboy boots. 70s fashion is back right now, so it's sort of inevitable that people would draw comparisons to the 2020s, but I think they could have easily lessened the Coachella vibes by making her outfits look less put together. The production also exacerbated the issue by putting Daisy, as well as the other women, in contemporary brands like Free People, which actually released a collaboration with the series. I do think they did a great job with her looks in Greece, as it felt clearly inspired by the Mediterranean while having the glamour and effortlessness that we associate with Daisy Jones. The blue caftan is actually one of my favorite pieces in the entire show. I do wish they'd had her wear a wig, as the character chopping off her hair after falling out with Billy is actually quite notable, being symbolic of the character's attempt at a fresh start. I'm actually pretty disappointed with Daisy's hair overall. It just doesn't feel as unruly and wild as I was envisioning in my head. Once she and the Six begin touring, Daisy's performance attire is all Stevie Nicks. The author was actually inspired to write the novel after seeing a Fleetwood Mac performance of the song Silver Springs, which was cut from their 1977 album, Rumors, which was famously recorded in the aftermath of several breakups amongst the band's members. So the choice to use Nicks as inspiration for Daisy definitely doesn't come out of nowhere. In my opinion, these are some of her better looks, as they more accurately capture the character's personality and declining emotional and mental state. And I love the choice of giving her messy makeup, which feels super rock and roll. In the book, Karen is described as regularly wearing turtlenecks as well as jeans and band tees, which is symbolic of how the character wants to be taken seriously by the men around her and how she refuses to be sexualized. Wingate says she took inspiration for Karen's look from Patti Smith, Suzi Quatro, Joan Jett, and Mark Bolan, which are great points of reference that I don't think make their way on screen, as Karen often looks way too prim and polished. In the series, Karen often wears high heels, sheer shirts, and the color black, which feels decidedly more feminine and fashion-forward than the tomboyish character in the book. The floral cutout swimsuit is actually the bane of my existence. While she does incorporate some masculine elements like blazers and waistcoats, they all feel too tailored and fitted, and I wish we'd seen her incorporate more casual pieces like loose denim, army jackets, and sneakers. I also think it's a missed opportunity that we didn't get to see her and Graham wear the same t-shirt once or twice by accident, just because that would have been so cute and allowed for funny interactions with the other characters. In an interview, Suki Waterhouse said that the production originally wanted Karen to look way more toned down, but she asked them to glam it up, which I do think is a misreading of the character on her part.
Put my jacket back on.
It's not gonna stay
No,
on.
I need shoulders. It's the look.
I'm a chick.
Yeah, but not really.
I'm not a huge fan of Karen's hair either, since it never changes, and I personally think a shaggy bob, something that looked like she cut it herself, would have been a way better fit, especially when you think about the direction her career takes after she leaves the Six. Realistically, someone who goes on to become the frontwoman of a punk band isn't dressing like she was just on the cover of Vogue. Camilla's wardrobe, which took inspiration from Ally McGraw and Bianca Jagger, is a hit or miss for me. At first, she has a super bohemian style, often wearing peasant dresses and florals, which could theoretically work because at that point in time she's more docile and domestic, but it's such a departure from what she wears later in the series that it muddles her style identity and therefore her character. Not to mention, it also creates a lot of overlap with Daisy, when the two women couldn't be more different apart from the person they've fallen in love with. I personally think that Simone is the best costumed female character in the show, as her style progression not only shows the character's evolution, but also the passage of time. Notably, she's the only female character who has a major hairstyle change over the course of the 70s. When she's living in LA, her style is generically hippie-ish, often overlapping with Daisy's looks but in a more autumnal color palette. Once she moves to New York, finding success professionally and personally, her style takes notes from Donna Summers and Diana Ross, featuring tight silhouettes, sequins, and fringe, and I like that we finally see something that isn't vaguely bohemian. My biggest note in regard to the costuming is that it all just feels too generic and broad. While they do stay true to the fashion trends of the 1970s, they aren't specific to a year, so 1971 looks no different from 1977, which couldn't be further from the truth. Although trends do move faster today, in the 70s people still experimented with their style, and I would have liked to have seen them commit to what made each year special, even going over the top at times, as it would have helped create a really unique look that could have set the series apart from other projects set in the 1970s. If you want to watch a film that nails this sort of progression with fashion, I highly recommend checking out 1998's Velvet Goldmine. Even with the problems that I've pointed out, I still found the series entertaining, and it's one of the better TV adaptations I've seen in recent years. So Netflix's Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo definitely has some big shoes to fill. What were your thoughts on Daisy Jones and the Six? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!